All right, y'all. Well, we're going to be jumping back into Deuteronomy tonight. I want to kind of rehearse where we've been the last couple weeks. 2 weeks ago, Dr. Hurley was teaching for us, and he gave us a formal introduction to Deuteronomy. He kind of laid out the structure and the parameters of the book. And then last week, when I was gone, Ron Scott introduced you guys to the first chapter of Deuteronomy. And so as y'all are turning tonight to Deuteronomy 2, somebody tell me something you've learned about or from the book of Deuteronomy so far. What have you seen?
How much is quoted in the New Testament?
Yeah, Ron, I'm trying to remember, is it the second most quoted book in the New Testament?
I think so.
Or maybe first? It's way up there.
Isaiah and
Yeah.
Deuteronomy.
And I mean, I wouldn't have expected that, just to be honest. Deuteronomy is one of those books we kind of neglect. And so to see that the New Testament places so much value on it was very interesting. Somebody else, what have you learned from Deuteronomy so far? Tell you one thing I found interesting when Dr. Hurley was teaching. He said that it was meant really to be used like a catechism for children. And that really helps me understand, because sometimes when you're reading through a chapter in Deuteronomy, you got a law about this over here and then something else over here, and you're thinking, there's no flow, what's going on? But when you read a catechism, that's kind of how it works, right? You've got a one-liner about this and then a one-liner about that. And so that was insightful to me. That helped me a lot. So in chapter 2 tonight, Moses is going to do sort of a retelling of the wilderness years of the Israelites. When Dr. Hurley was teaching, he explained that this document, Deuteronomy, it's got an introduction, which is what Ron went through last week. And then the next section is what's called a historical prologue. In other words, it's this is how we got here part of the story. Or if you watch TV shows, y'all know every episode is last week on, whatever. That's what this section is. So we're going to get the benefit of Moses' perspective. It's been a number of years since they began their wilderness wanderings. And so Moses has now got the benefit of time. He can look back and he can see what God was doing that he might not have been able to understand before. He's going to have that benefit of perspective. And I hope that as we go through this retelling tonight of these wilderness years, that it's going to give us the opportunity to reflect on our own past, on a time in our own lives that seemed like wilderness years, when we couldn't tell what God was doing, when we couldn't tell what He was up to. And I hope it'll give us some perspective on that. Not only is Deuteronomy a legal document, a covenant document, it can also be viewed as just one really long sermon from Moses. That's essentially what it is. And in chapter 1 last week, y'all kind of helped me walk back through this. Moses begins his sermon when the Israelites are at Mount Horeb. What happened at that mountain? What did God do with the people there? So He gives them the Ten Commandments. And this is, well, how would you guys summarize the Ten Commandments? What are they for? The rules for life, right? These are the sort of 10 basic rules to govern your Christian life with God. That's what they're about. And then, after God gives the law, He tells the people to leave the mountain and go where? Go to the promised land. I've set apart this whole part of the world for you to live in. I'm going to give it to you. And so Israel heads that way, and then they get to the border. Imagine that the promised land is this table that Michael and Carrie are sitting at. They get to the border, and they send a few guys in to check things out. And then what do the guys they send in, what report do they bring back? They got big people there. Becky's doing this. Big people over there. And not only big people, the big people live in big cities, right? And they're fortified. And so they say, you know what? I don't think we can do this. Their fear overcomes their faith, and they don't go in. And so God sentences them to how many years of wandering in the wilderness? 40. Until every person who refused to go into the promised land is dead. Till they're gone. That's where Moses left off last week. Now, before we start reading, I want us to try to put ourselves in the shoes of the Israelites who are going to hear what Moses has to say in Deuteronomy 2. They're not that generation, because that generation they're gone. They're the new generation, which means that the people who are going to hear this, it wasn't their sin that kept the people out of the promised land. It was their parents' sin, right? Now, Moses is about to rehearse and retell the sin of their parents. I don't know about you, but I don't like my family's dirty laundry being aired out. Do you? So it wasn't my sin, sure, but I don't like people talking bad about my mama and my daddy, right? That's my family. So you think you know what Moses is going to say, and you think you know how you're going to react to it, right? Not well. And I want y'all to just keep that frame of mind sort of in the back of your head as we begin reading this tonight and we see what Moses actually does say. Todd.
I mean, it's like Moses is giving them a history lesson, saying, those who don't know the history are going to repeat it.
Yes.
So it seems like he's doing a recap. And this is why we are where we are.
Yes. So you're 100% right about that. And even so, right, I'll put it this way, Todd. I'm happy to learn from the mistakes your dad made. But I don't want people to learn from the mistakes my dad made, right?
We call those cautionary tales.
That's right. When it's somebody else's family that we're going to air out their stuff, that's fine. But let's not do it with mine, right? And so I think you're 100% right. It is a cautionary tale learned from the past, but it's personal too. There's a personal touch to it. So let's see what Moses says. Will somebody read for us chapter 2, verses 1 through 8?
Then the Lord turned around and headed back across the wilderness towards the Red Sea, just as the Lord had instructed me, and we wandered around the region of Mount Seir for a long time. Then at last the Lord said to me, "You have been wandering around in this hill country long enough. Turn to the north. Give these orders to the people. You will pass through the country belonging to your relatives, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. The Edomites will feel threatened, so be careful. Do not bother them, for I have given them all in the hill country around Mount Seir as their property, and I will not give you even 1 square foot of that land. If you need food to eat or water to drink, pay them for it. For the Lord your God has blessed you in every step through the great wilderness. During these 40 years, the Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing. So we bypassed the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. We avoided the road along the valley of Abra Valley. They come up from Eoth and I don't know that one either.
That's it. That's it.
Okay.
Excellent work with you got a bunch of names thrown in there too.
Man, I don't do good with the Old Testament names.
Hey, just confidence. That's the way. However you say it. That's what I always say.
Nobody else knows.
That's right. Nobody knows, so just rock with it. No, thank you, John. All right. When I was reading this week, the first time I read this, the absolute futility of this wandering really hit me. Can you imagine? Look at verse 1. The way this reads, the people are literally just walking circles around this mountain. And I'm not talking like once or twice or however many times it is they walk around Jericho. Probably for decades. And they're walking around this mountain until everyone dies. That's it. That's the purpose, right? It's not hyperbole. It's not exaggeration. That's what they're doing. They are walking around this mountain in circles till everybody dies. Can you imagine? That's your life. Can you feel the futility of that? And I don't think we have to imagine too much, because maybe some of you in the room feel this way now or have felt this way. You get up, you go to work, you come home. You get up, you go to work, you come home. And you don't really feel like you're making a difference in the world, right? You're just doing enough to get through the day, and hopefully you can muster the strength to do it again tomorrow, right? I think it's sometimes in our lives we feel this way. It's just running on the hamster wheel, trying to make it through another day. We can relate to this. I think we can also imagine the temptations that might arise when we find ourselves in a situation like this. What kind of temptations do you think faced the Israelites as they marched in circles around the mountain for 30 years?
Bad attitude.
Okay, attitude problems. Kathy, say a little more about that. I think we're all tracking with you. What kind of bad attitude? And anybody chime in?
Grumbling and negative Nancy.
And seemingly justified, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Once it sets in, it's hard to get rid of.
And it grows, yes. Wes, you said towards God, right? So it's not just that I'm upset with Kathy, I got a bad attitude that way, or I'm upset with my mama. I got told I had a bad attitude a lot growing up. Bad attitude towards God, right? I heard somebody say, Ron said suicide. Talk to us about that.
Well, we had the Walk in the Darkness this week in Daphne, and I mean, that's for people that have been touched by suicide. I can't help but believe that is a new phenomenon that had to have been around even then.
And why would it be a temptation, Ron, if you were one of these people walking in circles around the mountain?
It's hopeless. I mean, you've given up.
So you've been sentenced to walk around the mountain till you die, and the temptation would be, well then, why not just go ahead? Just do it now. Todd.
Any account how many people left and just went their own way somewhere?
So say, this is another thing I have in my notes. Todd said, how many people just left and went somewhere else? Why would that be a temptation?
Hey, tired of walking around the mountain with nothing falling about all the time, and then B, you no longer trust that this is the plan.
Yeah.
Everybody else is crazy, and then you just pack up your family and go on to another.
If this is what's going to happen to this group of people until we're all gone, why not just pack it in and go somewhere else? Yes, John.
Could we not make some analogies to the Kairos prison ministry?
Mm.
And that this was perhaps a prison on their own making?
Yes. Say a little more about that.
A death penalty sentence in prison?
Yes. So these guys, right, some of these guys that are going to be on the retreat this weekend in the prison, they've got life sentences. You're going to do this same thing every day until you die. Some of them are on death row, right? All these temptations that we're talking about, these are things that these guys are dealing with. That's an amazing connection. Yes. Yes. Just walk till you die. It's literally a death march, right? Now, John said one more interesting thing, and that is it was a prison of, what did you say? They did it to themselves, right? And in some ways, I think we can all relate to this. That's the worst prison. If somebody else puts me in a bad spot, at least I've got somebody to be angry at and somebody to blame. When you do it to yourself, that's a dark place, right? Oh, yes. Towards who, Marvin? Yeah. Yeah. I'm tired of marching. Would you get on with it, right? Absolutely. That's a good thought, Marvin.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Did they know they were gonna die?
Oh, yes. God told them.
That's another reason, right?
Yes.
You already know it.
You know it's coming. And I think I've heard Susan Brown say it. I've thought it many times. It is a mercy of God that we don't know when we're going to go, right? That would be a horrible thing to know. And these guys don't exactly know when, but they know they're going.
Kind of like Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Finding out they were going to die.
Yes.
Thought it was going to be immediate.
Yes. But it was, and that there's anxiety in that, right? It's postponed. Yes, that's a good connection, Sean. So I think we've got the mindset. Okay, we understand what's going on with these people. So they're going to face these temptations, and as people were talking, you may have related with some of this stuff. You felt these temptations when you have been in a wilderness place in your own life, right? So into that environment, all the stuff that we just said, the despair, the temptation, it's in that environment that God speaks in verse 2. Let me read this again. Then the Lord said to me, "You've been traveling around this mountain country long enough." Let me stop for just a second. What's the immediate emotional reaction to that statement of God? Okay, yes, that means everyone's dead, first of all. And then, Joan, what did you do? Yes. Scored a touchdown, Wes said. So some kind of mix of relief and joy. Finally, we can move on. Okay, you're going to be excited. Turn northward and command the people. You're about to pass through the territory of your brothers, the people of Esau who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. So be very careful. Okay. Do you hear this new temptation? There's a new temptation here. For the first time in these people's lives, their life has direction. It's got meaning. God has spoken into it. We're going somewhere. It's got literal direction, right? We don't have to walk in circles anymore. And by the way, God says you're going to go through a new territory. And the people there are going to be terrified of you. What's the temptation? Take advantage. Take it over. They're going to be scared of you. They'll give it to you. They're so scared of you. You hear the temptation? Just reach out and just take it. But God says, look at this. Can you imagine? Verse 5, do not contend with them, for I will not give you any of their land. I loved John Mayer's translation. It said not 1 square foot, right? Or square inch, maybe.
Well, square foot, 1 square foot.
Not 1 square foot of it I'm going to give you. Now why? Because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. God's saying, this isn't yours. I gave it to someone else. I've got land for you, but this isn't it. You have to wait. I've got toddlers, y'all. They don't like to wait. I don't like to wait. When I want, look, we're Americans. We live in 2024. When we want something, when do we want it? Now. I ordered some shoes on Monday, and they were supposed to be here at like 2 o'clock this afternoon, and I was impatient waiting on the shoes to get here. I ordered them 2 days ago, right? That's who we are. That's what we're like, and these people were like that too. Verse 6, you shall purchase food from them with money that you may eat, and you shall also buy water from them with money that you may drink. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. This is, I hope y'all can feel this now. This is a big ask. You've lived a seemingly pointless life your whole life. You've had nothing, no land, no possession, and now you got to pass through somebody else's land, and they're going to be terrified of you, and you can't take it. You have to wait. You have to have faith. You've got to trust that I've got something better for you. Does this sound a little familiar? Like something that we might have read in the Old Testament already? Is the scenario familiar to you? What does it sound like?
The opposite of what the older generation had just gone through when they were the ones scared to go and take over the land. God commanded them to.
In other words, the shoe's now on the other foot. They're going to be around people who are terrified. That's a great connection, Tom.
Where did they get this money in the water America forever?
Still, it's a good question.
They don't have it, what they trade among each other. Understand how they have anything to buy food with.
Well, whatever money they took from Egypt, they
That's
haven't
it.
had anywhere to spend it. They had
That's
to
right.
go to Walmart, well, still in I mean, they haven't used it.
And the Walmart, it comes down from heaven, right?
God provides food, He provides water, the clothes
Yeah.
don't wear out. So they
That's it.
save it.
That's it. They still got all the Egyptian money, right? It's a good thought, though, Marvin. No? No, in fact, we'll read that in a little bit. Their clothes did not wear out. It's amazing.
As much as the world has advanced, so has currency. So
Yeah.
what was currency?
I mean, and we know they got jewelry from the Egyptians, so stuff like that, yeah. So here's,
God give these other people the land that they go.
we're going to get there, I promise. In fact, we're going to spend about half our night on that. So Ken asked, why did the other people get this land? We're going to spend a lot of time on that, so hold that thought. All right, here's the bell it rang for me. This sounds a little bit like the Garden of Eden to me. God gives them all this. I've given you all this, and there's a background promise in the first few chapters of Genesis that if you pass the test, it's going to be even better, right? If you don't eat the fruit, it's going to be even better if you'll just wait, if you'll just trust me. And then Satan slithers into the garden, and he says, it's right there. Why don't you just reach out and take it? Nobody's going to stop you, right? The people in the land, they're not going to stop you. Just reach out and take it. God's holding out on you. He doesn't want you to have what's best. Take it for yourself. Y'all, I would suggest that this temptation is the constant temptation of mankind. Are you going to trust God, which often, I might even say always, means waiting and having faith, or you're going to reach out and take for yourself? And y'all, we live in a self-help world that preaches as gospel, reach out and take. Take what's yours. If you don't have it, the world owes it to you. You work hard, you reach out and you get it, you take it. This gospel is a little different. It says, wait. It says, trust the promises of the Lord. See what He has for you. Wait in faith. Let me read verse 7 again, because we might ask, what's the point of this? Why does God subject us to this kind of thing, to this test? Verse 7, for the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. So here's what I want to encourage you with 3 things. If you're going through a wilderness period in your life right now where things seem pointless, where your daily existence just feels like that hamster wheel where nothing's getting accomplished and you wonder where God is, let me encourage you with 3 things from this text. First of all, verse 7, God has blessed you in the past. Like Moses writing Deuteronomy, you have the benefit today of looking back in your life and seeing where God was at work and where He has blessed you. I'm going to read verse 7 again. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. You can see that today. You can look back in your life and see where God was working, where He's been good to you. And so, as time has now passed, I want to encourage you, when that feeling of futility, that wilderness feeling comes up, confront that with God's blessing on your life in the past. If you're struggling today, remember what God did yesterday. Remember the last wilderness period that you were going through. You can now see how God was at work. He's at work today. You just don't have the benefit of perspective yet. You just can't see it yet. But you will likely be able to soon. Second thing, to me, this is the most encouraging. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. That means God knows where you are. That means He knows what season of life you're in. He knows what you're feeling, the futility that you're experiencing, how you just feel like you're running on a treadmill and you're not getting anywhere. He knows that. And I'm going to go a step farther than this. He not only knows, He put you there. How did the Israelites get into the wilderness? God sent them. And remember, it's not just punishment, because this is a new generation. It's not their sin. God sent them. So if you're in a wilderness period in your life tonight, you're there because God put you there, and you're not there for no reason. God doesn't do anything for no reason. You need to know that God knows where you are. He knows what you're going through. And though you may not be able to see the purpose in this season in your life, there is one. And Romans tells us, y'all can say it with me if you know it, God works in all things for our good, right? He's working in your life for good, even if you can't see it. Third thing is this. God's provision in the past should inspire you to trust Him in the future. Notice, we didn't read this section. It's the last part of verse 8. The first part. So we went on away from our brothers, right? That means that in the midst of that great temptation, they actually passed through it. They managed to get through that land without grabbing it, without reaching out and taking the fruit, because they saw and remembered what God had done for them in the past. And they said, okay, if He's provided for us all these years, He'll provide for us tomorrow. And that was enough to get them through that season, right? So you can see that in your own life. God has blessed you in the past. You can see where He's provided for you. Let that inspire you to trust Him in the future. If He has done it in the past, He will do it again. There is hope. There is an end to the wilderness wanderings. All right, let's read this next section. This is where we're going to get to Ken's question about the different owners of this land. Somebody read verses 9 through 15.
We turned and went in the direction of the wilderness of Moab. And the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar, the people of Lot, for a possession. The Elam formerly lived there, a people great and many, and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they also are counted as the Rephaim. But the Moabites call them Ammon. The Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau depossessed them and destroyed them before them, and settled in their place as Israel did in the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them. So now rise up and go over to the brook of Zered. So we went over the brook of Zered, and the time from our leaving Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the brook Zered was 38 years, until the entire generation, that is, the men of war, had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them. For indeed the hand of the Lord was against them, to destroy them from the camp until they had perished.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, so Ken asked this question, and Ken, you correct me if I'm recounting it wrong. Ken says, how did those people get the land, right? The people who were there before. So we've got, if y'all noticed in this section that Ron read, there's this sequence of possession. And so let me try to recount this for you. So in verse 9, the current occupants of this piece of land are the Moabites. Y'all see that? Moab lives there. Okay? And the piece of land is called Ar, right? And then we see in verse 10 who has lived there before. The Emim lived there before. And then we see verse 12, the Horites before them, but the people of Esau dispossessed them. So you're getting this, it used to belong to these guys, then it belonged to these guys, now it belongs to this group. Y'all tracking with me? Let me ask, just as sort of a matter of fact, how did the land change hands? Yeah, almost certainly, right? Todd's not in the room, but there wasn't a whole lot of real estate business going on in these days, right? There were no, vacation villas on Mount Seir, so to speak, that were up for rent. If you wanted somebody's land, you took it, right? This has been the case, by the way, for almost the entire history of the world. Real estate is a pretty new thing, and we're sort of spoiled, privileged Americans. This is how we do things. But that's not the way things have usually gone. If you wanted some land, you tried to take it, and maybe you got it, or maybe you didn't. And if you didn't, you died, and if you did, somebody else died, right? That's how this worked. Now, there's a piece of this that's very important for us to see. The matter-of-fact side that I think we all understand is the battle side, the human side of this. But what's very important for us to see, it's the point that Deuteronomy is making, is in verse 9. Who gave the land of Ar to the people of Lot? God did. Now, from our perspective as human beings, it changed hands through battle, through conquest. But the point that Deuteronomy is making is that God is sovereign over the outcome of battles. He decides who wins battles, right? It's not just that He knows who's going to win. He decides who's going to win, okay? Now, what we need to understand is that land, anywhere, anytime, in all of world history, including today, does not change hands except by the sovereign will of God. That is the only way. It's always been the only way. It's the only way today. There are no accidents in world history. Not in battles, not in the exchange of land, not in any way whatsoever. Everything is done by design. Everything is done purposefully and on purpose. Now, on that note, we're asking, and we ought to always ask when we're studying the Bible, why is this here? Why is this little bit of information in Deuteronomy chapter 2? Well, God does a little foreshadowing in verse 12. Y'all look there with me. Let me read this. The Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place. Here's the key. As Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave them. Okay, here's why this is here. In other words, just as God gave the land of Seir first to some people, then He took it away from them and gave it to someone else, then He took it away from them and gave it to someone else, this is the same thing that God did with the Israelites in the Promised Land. Are y'all tracking with me? The point that Deuteronomy is making is that Israel is not unique in their gaining of the Promised Land. This was not exactly a unique thing. For all of world history, God has been taking land away from some people and giving it to others, right? That's what He does with Israel. That's what He does with the Promised Land. Now, why is this important? You may have heard this in your study and your interaction with culture. This subject, Israel's conquest of the Promised Land, often comes up as a matter of contention. It's almost a moral issue that the world, and let's be honest, some Christians take with the Old Testament. How could it be that a righteous and loving and good God could command His people to go in, wipe out an entire people group, and take their land? We shouldn't dismiss the question, by the way. It's a good question. And it should bother us a little bit. And the first point that Deuteronomy wants to make in answering this question is that Israel is not unique. in this way. They are not the only people group who ever went in by the will of God and dispossessed a people of their land. This is the only way that land changes hands. So let's think about our own country to just put this in perspective. We often hear today, it kind of rises and falls in popularity to talk about, what a horrible thing the first settlers did to the Indians, to the American Indians, right? And it's talked about as if this were unique, that the Indians had lived here in America for all of history. This was their land until the evil Europeans came and drove them out and took their land. Given what we just learned, just to get a little perspective, how did the American Indians get the land that they lived on? They took it from somebody else, who took it from somebody else, who took it from somebody else. And all this happened by the will and appointment of God. So Israel is not unique in this way. That's the first case that Deuteronomy is making. Now, we can still ask the moral question. How is it that a good and loving God can do this? How can He take land from one group of people and give it to another? I want y'all to turn with me to Psalm 24. When you get there, somebody read Psalm 24, verse 1. Okay. Psalm 24 gives us two answers to this question. How can God take land away from one group of people and give it to someone else?
It's His.
The first answer is the land is His. He made it. He owns it. He will always own it. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And because the land is His, that means that He can take it away from whoever He wants to, and He can give it to whoever He wants to, and that is all moral and good and just because He owns it. Now, there's the people question. How can God do this to people? What does Psalm 24:1 say? He owns the people too. Let me read it again. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. Every person on the face of the earth, you, me, and everyone who ever lives, is created in the image of and by the will of our sovereign God. We're His. And that means that He can do with us as He pleases, right? We're His people. The Bible will say the sheep of His pasture, right? And so God is free to do with the land and with the people as He sees fit, as He pleases. That's the answer to this question. And when you hear this discussed, it's often sort of Christians despair of this question, like there's no good answer to it. But there is, right? It doesn't mean that the world will accept the answer to this question, but there is an answer to this question. How could God do this? Well, He has every right to do this. He is the creator and the owner of this world and everything in it, including you and including me.
John, is Abraham's connection here because they're all related to Abraham?
Yes.
His covenant with Abraham. To
Yes?
be the father of.
Yeah, there's, Ron, I was reading Deuteronomy commentary this afternoon, and the author points out that it's not only that God has given these land, or given this land to other people, they're also kin, right? They're related to the Israelites. John Chapman was in South Carolina at his farm last week, and his farm is in one of these towns where John said everybody's, we're kind of all cousins. He said somebody saw him and said, "Hey, cuz," and he's like, "I'm not exactly sure who you are," but that's kind of what's going on here. They're distant cousins, it's been a long time, but they're related, right? And they got that connection through Abraham. That's good, Ron.
Now, let's go back to what you said, that people that God owns choose not to accept that it's His right, that may be why they lose their land.
Yes. Yes, and there's certainly something there, Tom, right, that the Israelites who are in a special way God's people, He says, hey, I'm going to give you this. And they say, we actually don't think that's going to work. And that is the reason that they end up losing that land, right? And I also want to say one more thing here. As we think about the history of Israel, the Canaanites lived in Canaan. It was their land. But then God took it away from them and gave it to the Israelites. If you fast forward through the Old Testament, what happens to the Israelites? The same thing. Some of it goes to the Babylonians, some of it goes to the Assyrians. They're not special in this way, right? It's not like they are God's special people, right? But in this case, they end up experiencing the same fate for exactly the reason that Tom said. They don't listen to the Lord, and so God dispossesses them of their land. John?
John, in verses 10 through 12, you seem to be like that historical insertion.
Yes, it's good. So, John, is there a question behind that or just kind of an observation?
An observation.
Yeah. So this, if y'all remember when Dr. Hurley was giving us the intro, there are some places in the book of Deuteronomy that it's kind of like a little question mark pops up in our mind and we think, did Moses write that? Or did that kind of get stuck in there later? Which, by the way, I can remember being in seminary and the first time I heard that suggestion, I kind of bristled up and I thought, no, Moses wrote the whole thing. It's not a bad thing, right? Another place in here, John, if you look, verse 12 reads like Israel has already taken possession of the land. Now, was that written in faith? Maybe. Or was it inserted later? Maybe, right? So there's going to be some places like this that seem like sort of editorializing later on. And that's okay. That's even a good thing. It's helpful information.
John,
Yes, sir.
another thing, that the Canaanites, they go back to Noah and Ham and the curse of, God didn't curse Ham for seeing his Noah's nakedness. Noah cursed Canaan, his son.
Yes.
And those were so you can see that path all the way.
The tracing, right, all the way down. All right, I'm going to skip over there's a bunch of battles and journeys in the middle of this. I'm going to skip over this, and I want us to get to the end here, verses 36 and 37. Let me read this. From Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, and from the city that is in the valley as far as Gilead, there was not a city too high for us. The Lord our God gave all into our hands. Only to the land of the sons of Ammon you did not draw near. That is, to all the banks of the river, Jabbok and the cities of the hill country, whatever the Lord our God had forbidden us. Do you hear it? The cities that God wanted to give them, did they get them? Yes. There wasn't a city too high. There was no natural fortification, no barrier, no nothing that could stop the transfer of the land that God wanted them to have. On the other hand, the land that God forbid them to have, did they get any of it? None. I love John Meyer's translation, not a square foot, right? So God keeps His promises. That's what I want us to see. When they seem too hard, right, the cities were too well fortified, they were too high, He still keeps His promises. And we can almost be sure that there was some little city, down in the plain that you could have taken over with 10 guys and some half swords that God didn't want them to have. They're not having it because it's not for them. He has not given it to them. God did not disappoint. He asked His people, wait. I know you've been wandering in this wilderness for all these years. Wait. I've made a promise to you. I've got something better for you. Wait. And He did not disappoint them. And so I want to tell you tonight, if you're in one of these times, if you're in one of these wilderness seasons, wait. God did not disappoint His people then. He will not disappoint you now. He has not disappointed you in the past. He will not disappoint you in the future. And I want us to go back as we kind of wrap this time up before questions. I want us to go back to my thought at the beginning of this chapter. You would have felt, I'm sure, I would have felt, that all that wandering, the circles around the mountain, it was wasted time. It was pointless. It was just marching around until everybody died. That's how we'd feel. But Moses didn't believe that. All these years later, as he writes this account in Deuteronomy 2, Moses believed that God was doing something in those years of wandering, those wilderness years. Moses believed that God used those wilderness years to teach and to prepare this new generation, to show them how to wait in faith, to show them that God keeps His promises. And so might it not be that God is using your wilderness years for something similar? That in this time where things seem futile, where it seems like you're running on the hamster wheel, where it seems like nothing's getting done, might it not be that God is at work? That even though you can't see His purpose in your life, He's got one. That He's teaching you. He's shaping and forming and molding you. He's showing you that He keeps His promises. Might it not be that, as it was for the Israelites, what's waiting at the end is so much better than the things that you're tempted to reach out and to grab today? I hope that's encouraging for you tonight. I hope that you see a little bit of yourself in your life in this text, because as Paul will say in the New Testament, everything that was written for our instruction, so that we could identify, so that we could learn, so that our own journey through the wilderness would be easier than it was for these guys. All right, y'all, we got about 5 minutes for questions, comments, and thoughts. We'll start with Susan.
What was the lifespan of the man?
So we know Moses, and perhaps he's a poor example to choose, lives about 120 years. His life is easily divided into 3 40-year spans, 40 of which, by the way, are wilderness years. Right? When he's 40, he kills the Egyptian, and he has to flee Egypt and go out into the middle of nowhere, and God doesn't come to him till he's 80. And we can see in that, I promise I'll answer your question, Susan. Did Moses get out there for 40 years for no reason? Was that just wasted time? No, absolutely not. So Susan, that's kind of the closest one that I can think of off the top of my head. The short answer would be very similar to ours. We're past the point in the Old Testament where the lifespans are real long, so very much close to our lifespans today. Good question. What else, guys? Marvin.
Were the cities and things just given over? It says sometimes they were given over to the Israelites, but they never. I'd like what to mention something in there. Was there battles? Did the Israelites lose 30,000 men to it? Did they kill everybody or disperse? It said. Did they all? You got 1 million people in the country. They all dispersed. They have to go to the other countries around them.
Right.
The other fighting. I mean, it's really I can't comprehend.
So it's a great question. And when we get to Joshua, which is, that's the next book, right? Yeah. I only half joke. Part of my last seminary test, I had to write all the books of the Bible in order. And I counted when I got done, and I was too short. And I had a panic attack for about 20 minutes before I figured them out. But no, Marvin, when we get to Joshua, we actually get a lot of battle accounts. And so, but in answer to your question, what's interesting is it varies. It's not like it happened the same way every time. So when we get to Jericho, right, which is a story most of us heard in Sunday school growing up, march around, blow the trumpets, yell, the walls fall down, we run in. Well, as far as we know, that's the only time it worked that way, right? They didn't get to the next place and say, hey, let's do the Jericho thing again. That was fun. And then sometimes the battle doesn't go so well, right, for various reasons. And then sometimes we'll read of a famous account, I think this one's in Kings. There was a group of people that were supposed to be wiped out, but they weren't, and that causes all kinds of problems. And so my short answer is it happened a little different every time, and we do get to learn about some of it, but it's a really good thought. One or two more things, y'all.
No,
Yes, sir.
I think on that same subject, if we had all of that information, we could really easily get lost in the weeds
We could.
and miss the point.
There's I don't remember who I first heard say it, but one important thing to remember when we read the Old Testament is it is history, but it's theological history. And the point of saying that is not that the history is not true, but we don't learn the history just for bare facts. We learn the history to learn something about God. And so in His wisdom, the Holy Spirit left out some things, and He included some things so that the point that was being made about God could even be understood by people like me, right? As dense as we can be sometimes. It's a great point. That some of that detail, and man, you know, we've been studying Acts. Thank God He left some detail out of Acts, because we would all be trying to, can we just be exactly like the church in Acts? And then we'll have all the things. It's like, no, God left some of that out on purpose, right? And it's good that He did. I was talking to Ron Sunday, yeah. If you're here for Sunday school, we don't know which mountain Jesus was transfigured on. And thank God we don't. Because there'd be like 75 churches up there, and that's the only place we'd want to worship, and we'd turn the thing into an idol, right? And notice, we'll see at the end of this book, thank God we don't know where Moses was buried. What would we do if we did? We'd go worship the shrine of Moses, right? Because that's who we are. So I'm with you 100%. Thank goodness that some of this stuff got left out. We don't need to know. It's good for us not to. One more thing, y'all, and we'll wrap up our time tonight.
I think too, that this is very obvious throughout the Bible, and especially right here, is that we've got to remember we're the creature.
He made us.
Right.
He owns us. Yes. And, the most offensive version of that statement to me is, will the pot say to its maker, why did you make me for this purpose or for that, right? It's like, you know your place. And that can be hard, y'all, because we go through some tough stuff in life. And we want to yell why at God, or how dare you. Got to remember, He's a creator, right? But the promise is, and the good news is, it's all for our good. We just can't see it sometimes. Yeah. All right, y'all, we're going to pray. And actually, tell you what, before we get crazy, Miles isn't in here, Randy's not either. Somebody help me if you know. What do we want this room to look like for Saturday? Does anybody know? Okay. Will you do that, John? I'm going to pray, and then y'all kind of listen up for instructions, and so we make sure we know what to do with this room for Saturday. Let me pray for us. Father, I thank You for Deuteronomy 2. I pray that each one of us tonight could be encouraged. If we're in one of those seasons of life that feels like wilderness, that feels futile, would You encourage us? You know where we are. You've put us here, and You're working for our good. Help that to bolster our spirits tonight. We love You. We thank You for Jesus. We pray this in His name. Amen. Thanks, guys, and I'm